proposed 4 railways. They weren't even given imaginative titles. Railway number 1 was the main route from Alsager in the north to Silverdale. So it came down from Alsager, down through the village, Audley, Halmer End, Leasit, and curved round to Silverdale, heading in an easterly direction, 7.5 miles. Railway number 2 was much shorter. It was a link from Leasit here, facing south and heading to a junction which then faced towards Market Drayton, on another line which was proposed as part of the same scheme to link Silverdale and Market Drayton, primarily to keep out the Great Western Railway, which had already reached Market Drayton and was trying to build lines westwards. Railway number 3 was a very short branch from Audley to Diglake, to the collieries there, just up here, so just next to what became Audley Station and Bignell End. And railway number 4 was a short north-facing branch to join up to one of Ralph Sneed's other railways, the Torp branch, but it's not shown connected there. I'll tell you why in a moment. So that was the very unimaginative way in which Audley got its railways. Right, here we go. So the North Staffordshire Railway was given powers to raise capital through shares of £250,000, which is about £20 million today, and to borrow a further £83,000 to build these lines. And local people were very enthusiastic. Many industrialists and many ordinary people bought shares to get the railway here. Now, having defended its patch, the North Staffordshire Railway was in no hurry to actually build it. It had kept its rivals out. Industry was depressed, partly as a result of a slump in the USA caused by the Civil War. But the main bank over in New Gurney, which financed a huge amount of railway construction projects, went bankrupt. And it looked like events in London and the USA might deprive Audley of its railway after all. On the 25th of March 1868, the North Staffordshire Railway considered asking Parliament for a time extension because they had to build the line in 7 years. That was what the Act of Parliament said. They had a couple of years to raise the finance and acquire the land, and the rest of the time to actually construct it. They'd already spent £75,000 building just railway number 1, and not even all of that. It was far from finished. They thought of various economy measures, but they'd spent a lot more money because the terrain was much more difficult than they had expected. And in particular, they encountered a lot of wet ground. And of the southern part of railway number 1, from Leasit to Silverdale, was so wet, the cuttings, that it could never be used. So it was a complete waste of money. This is one of the reasons why the line was so difficult to build. Although they included quite a lot of hefty earthworks, the gradients were very steep in places, especially considering this was a line primarily to haul heavy freight, coal trains. So for walking, cycling or driving a car, we don't think about gradients terribly much, but for trains they're really important. Not just because you have to haul heavy loads up a hill on smooth and often slippery rails, but you have to stop trains going down a hill as well, and that's far more difficult. So some of the gradients on here, including a gradient of 1 in 41 in several places. That is incredibly steep for a railway. The steepest you would normally work, you would hope to work trains over would be about 1 in 100. So 1 in 41 was extremely steep, and that was combined also with some very sharp curves. Because as the railway had taken so long to build, it was having to work its way around not only hills, earthworks, rivers and roads, but also, down at Leasit, it had to snake its way in an S-bend between 2 existing collieries on extremely steep gradients. So the line was difficult to build and very expensive. I've got a copy of that diagram at the back if anyone wants to look at it in more detail. It took until 1870 to open the line. The board was told, probably by someone who hoped to keep their job, that it would be ready by the 1st of July 1870. In fact, they tried running some trains over it because they were on a penalty of £50 per day they went over the 7-year limit. The collieries were all lined up to send coal, but it wasn't actually opened until the 24th of July 1870. They were 1 week inside the time limit. The fully engineered freight railway featured double track throughout, so it wasn't some little tiny country branch line. It was designed for heavy traffic in each direction. Full signalling, 2 signal boxes, extensive earthworks I'll show you in a moment, and civil engineering constructed of iron, timber, local stone and brick masonry. Now we're very, very fortunate that there is a series of photographs taken of the railway in about 1895. Most railways don't have a series of photographs like this, certainly of that sort of age. They're at the National Archives in Kew. So much easier to get to. The National Archives in Kew. And they're not in very good condition, but they're obviously from glass plates at some point. So that's what I want to show you for some of the rest of the tour. Most of them have never been published. Of the Audley line ones, about 4 were published in the 1960s because somebody made some copies. They're not very good copies. So I've gone and I've looked at these photographs. I've made as good a digital copies of them as I can, because they show the whole railway. The complete set is there for the Audley line of all the civil engineering structures as they existed in 1895. This is an example. This is Jamage Junction, which was the junction between railway number 1 and railway number 4. Now you might roughly know where that is. So we're looking north. That bridge is still there. You can see just through the bridge one of the 2 signal boxes that were constructed on the line to control traffic on the junction, which went round to Jamage Colliery. And just behind that signal box, you can still see where it is today on the ground. The bricks are still there. Runs the A500 right straight away through behind there. And in the winter, you can see this from the other direction. So you can see the hefty engineering. If you go down there now, you can see how deep the cutting was excavated, all by hand. The navvies who built these things, they had a few tools. They had a shovel, a pick, a wheelbarrow, and a spade, and a plank. The plank was to wheel the wheelbarrow, because otherwise it got stuck in the mud. And that was all they had, all done by human muscle power. So that is Jamage Junction, with the track, double track there, and one of the very tall signals which characterised the railway, so they could be seen from a long way off. And this is on the gradient, which from here descended very steeply down to Alsager. So the trains used to reverse here, coming from Jamage Junction, and then set off north down to Alsager. And that's what it looks like today. So if you stand in that cutting just a little bit further along, that's a wintertime shot. There's baths, old sinks, building rubble, all kinds of masses of tyres, old hedge cuttings, all kinds of things. So I wouldn't really recommend it, but that bridge is still there, all shored up because of the mining substance. If you come on one of my guided walks, then I'll take you down. Here's a bridge that's completely vanished, it's completely filled up to the top. This is at the south end of the line, on the section of railway number 2, which ran from Leaset down to a junction at Honeywell Junction at Kiel. And this was a typical example of a bridge just for a lane. So these two bridges are different examples of ones built just for small roads, minor roads. This one built quite cheaply with timber supports to very long timber balks between the stone piers. But that one has completely vanished. Here's one at Miles Green, which some of you might recognise. This is a very standard railway bridge built in brick, whereas the others were built in local stone. And if you go and see some of the ones that survive today, they are beautifully built. They were built in 1870 and they've survived incredibly well. So this is at Miles Green with a double track going through. And I'll show you what it looks like. You can probably recognise what it looks like today. We can get it to work. There we go. Oops. There we are. So it's been shored up. It's under the iron girders there, but basically many of you will have walked or cycled underneath that. So that is under taking the normal road over the top. And actually, when the railway came, several of the roads were reorganised to cut costs. So one of the things the railway could do by its Act of Parliament was rearrange some of the roads so that you only had to have one level crossing. There was only one level crossing on this line, or one bridge. That was quite unpopular. That was done actually up at Bignell End, where Audley Station ended up. And I have read that, a bit like people say about high speed 2, the railway coming would be very, very disruptive. This one chap in a row of 4 cottages complained that now that the railway had come, the road that used to run in front of his house now ran at the back, so his back door was now his front door. Very confusing. This is the underbridge crossing the main Kiel to Maybe Road, what we now call the A525, between Kiel and Maybe Heath. And you can see that there wasn't very much traffic and no white lines in 1895. Very substantial bridge, and you'll see that it's built slightly on a skew, because for the major roads, the railway couldn't realign them, so instead of realigning the road, they had to build the bridge to accommodate the line of the road. Yeah, that's what it looks like today. I took that picture, I say today, I took that picture yesterday, took my life in my hands to stand on the main road and take it. You can see the bridge abutments are still there on either side. You can see them much more clearly in the winter. Very heavily engineered railway. Now here's one which will be familiar to many of you down at Halmer End. This again is a skew bridge over an existing road, you can see actually that this was taken on a glass plate, and you can see that there were probably two children stood there who couldn't stand there still enough but long enough for the exposure. So there's a little blur in the centre left there. That would be a couple of children who wouldn't move out of the way, I would think. So the railway's coming in across from the top here, so it's heading south, we're looking sort of north there, and Halmer End Station is over on the left. So I'll just show you another picture of that. It's a bit more like some people might remember it. Not a very well composed picture, but that's a picture of the same underbridge in the 1960s when it's been rebuilt with a different deck, and also a shelter to stop falling bits onto the passers-by. In the 1960s, and that's basically what it looks like today, although the embankment has been dug away around the retaining wall on this side, and I would imagine that's all going to get pulled down and the house will be built there soon. Here's another example of a bridge. This was built at Leaset over the existing colliery railway between two of the collieries at Maybe Heath, the Maybe Colliery Company, so the railway had to just snake its way around. This was built entirely in timber, and there's absolutely no trace left of it at all now. There's just a big gap in the embankment there, where people can walk through on the walk to the This is a more unusual one. This is another rail bridge over a railway line. So this is right near a mini pit, so up Red Hall Lane, and so this was where the Audley branch railway was going over the top, so Halmer End Station was along to your right, and then the railway headed off up towards Red Hall Farm, climbing all the time, before dropping down to Leaset the other side. Underneath here was a rope-worked railway, no engines, everything was pulled by hefty ropes running on these rollers here, so that wagons could be moved from Mini Pit by gravity down to Podmore Hall Colliery, and then out on the Mill and Coal Coke and Iron Company's railway, which ran down the Eichtdale Valley. And the reason they did that was because they hated paying the North Staffordshire Railway to take the goods out on the public railway when they could knock a few miles off the journey by running on their own railway. So this was a means by which the Mill and Coal Coke and Iron Company could save a few pence on every tonne by running on its own railway, putting them on the North Staffordshire Railway down at the junction at the bottom of the Eichtdale branch. So this bridge, some of you may be familiar with that, is it in the 1960s, looking very, very similar to what it did in 1895. And that's what it looks like now. And so if you've never been to go and have a look at it, then copy the picture and go and have a look. Very good condition. Here's another example. This is where all the farms whose land was bisected by the railway had the right to have a crossing. Many of them just had a flat crossing, so that they could move livestock and later vehicles from one side of the track to the other. But where the line was on the embankment, as much of it was here, then in this example, just north of Audley Station at Big Lake Farm, they had to put a bridge in, a small bridge, as small as they could get away with, underneath the railway. That bridge is still there today. that's what it looks like today. Of course, if the open cast coal mine goes ahead, then that will all go, unfortunately. And actually that has on it the name of the foundry which cast the girders which support the track of Hartley, Arno and Fanning, which only started in 1870, so it must have been down in Stoke, so it must have been one of the very first things that they made for the railway. When you're walking that way next, go and have a peer up at it, you'll be able to see the name of the maker on the girder. So, the Audley lines prospered in the first 10 years, but only for freight traffic, no passengers at all. Coal was moved north and south, although Madeley Colliery at Leasett also largely moved its coal out on that line built by Thomas Firmstone back in 1837. Because again, it was cutting the amount of mileage that it was having to pay per tonne to the railway company by dropping it onto the London North Western Railway a few miles further on. New collieries opened, for instance, at Dig Lake at Bignell End in 1870. Minnie and Podmore in the 1880s, can't remember because the words have dropped off the bottom of my slide. Now, around this time, 1870 marked quite a change in Audley. I'm not a social historian, but I'm sure some of you will correct me if I'm wrong, but 1871 census, Halmer End became just bigger than Audley. So Audley as an area changed from being a rural parish really to an industrial parish. That was the sort of scale of change that was going on at that time, with all the construction of the miners' houses mainly at Halmer End. I like this picture the best. Not everything went according to plan. I'd love to know the date of this picture. We've got two pictures of this incident. It was just above that occupation bridge I showed you at Dig Lake Farm. You can go up there and you can see exactly where it was. The engines come off on the points. I'd love to know who did it and whether he's in that photograph, whether he's having to help pull it back onto the rails. We know they did get it back onto the rails. If you've ever been up and walked on that embankment, the ground's very, very soft because it's just made of old colliery waste. Thousands of rabbits everywhere, which is why they're having to dig all the way underneath it and put something solid underneath it before they can pull the engine back onto the track. So, 1876, the Audley Local Board, the predecessor of the council, lobbied the North Staffordshire Railway to add a passenger service because people would see all these freight trains crashing about all the time, but they couldn't get on a train to travel to Newcastle, to Stoke, to Alsager, to Harecastle, wherever. The North Stafford reluctantly agreed in 1878, but it cost them quite a lot of money to improve it because they'd only built it to freight standard, although it was heavily engineered. So they had to improve the signalling a lot. For example, it cost £10,000 just to improve the signalling on the north end to avoid trains crashing into the crew line because of the long gradient running down to the crew line. So it wasn't a cheap undertaking, but they did save money on the stations. They built the cheapest possible stations they could, 3 of them. And only when the train service was established did they actually change the arrangement down in the south end so that trains didn't have to reverse, which was adding 10 minutes to the journey. So they made all these changes, and then on the 25th of June 1880, a special first trip over the line took place, and there was a celebratory lunch. They always had those when they opened a line for passenger service. No celebration when it was a freight line. They always had them when they opened passenger service. Tradition had it that you always held a slap-up lunch for the poor in the parish. So, in particular, the people in the workhouse. However, the records about this particular celebratory lunch was it was held at the North Stafford Hotel in Stoke, which belonged to the North Staffordshire Railway, so presumably they got it cheap. And it was held for the Board of Guardians of the workhouse, led by their chairman, Mr. Rigby. I think it was William Rigby, who owned Bignell Hill Colliery. He was a prominent local businessman around here. So the celebratory lunch, actually, on this occasion, sadly, was for Mr. Rigby and his business associates, not the poor of the parish. Well, the stations that were opened on the 28th of June 1880 were at Leasett, at Audley, at Bignell End, so not exactly in the middle of Audley, and at Halmer End. Now, the North Staffordshire Railway sorry, this has jumbled all the stuff up here. But anyway, the timber buildings that they provided were explicitly designed to be picked up and relocated somewhere else in case the traffic wasn't very good. So there weren't enough passengers. So not only did they build cheap stations, they built portable cheap stations. But North Staffordshire Railway really did do this. They built a station out at Keele Racecourse, and when Keele Racecourse foundered, they moved it down to Tean on the Tean branch. Just picked it up and moved it. There was no direct service to Alsager, so a fourth station opened at Torquay and Alsager Road in 1889. Now the reason that they couldn't serve Alsager station was because the line, you might remember from the map, when it went up to Alsager, it curved east at Alsager East Junction, and a major locomotive depot was built there. So there was no scope to put a line in that then faced west so that trains could go into Alsager station itself. So they had to build a small station on the outskirts of Alsager, and then you walked in. You may know that in railway terminology, if a station is called something road, it means there's a long way from wherever it claims to be. That was the case. They renamed it Alsager Road in 1902 because if you think about it, where it was there near the Lindley pub outside Alsager, it's a really long way from Torquay. And if you got off at that station thinking when you're at Torquay, you were going to be pretty cross. This is the station master at Halmer End from a postcard. I don't know his name, but somebody maybe in the group has researched the names of the station masters. The station masters had houses constructed later. We've seen one in the picture of the Skew Bridge at Halmer End already. They were at Audley, Halmer End and Leasit, and they all still survive, the station masters' houses in good condition. Why did they build station masters' houses? Well, the station master was a very important job, a bit like a bank manager, well, until a few years ago we talked about bank managers, but the station master was a pillar of the community. So you might think, well, the North Staffordshire Railway built houses because it was an important job. Well, that's partly true, but also it ensured that they were punctual, they lived over the shop, and if they did something stupid, they'd lose their house as well as their job. So actually, that's why the North Staffordshire Railway provided houses. And at Audley station, actually the house was built to back onto the goods yard, so it was also providing some security for the goods yard as well. So here's some of the stations, well, all the stations from that same series in 1895. This is Audley alongside Diglake Colliery. So this is up on the embankment as it went across by the plough on a big bridge, which we'll look at later in a moment. And you can see Diglake Colliery over there on the right. Audley wasn't a very pleasant place by the time it had become an industrial village, with all that smoke pouring out, not far from where people live. You can see these very cheap buildings, the little shelters there, which could probably house about a dozen people if they squashed together, if it was raining. And the platforms are all built of timber. There's no trace of those left today. They did provide lights, about 2. This is what Audley Station looked like down at road level. So the building you can just see through the right-hand side of the viaduct there is the plough, the pub. And so this crossover, you can see all the base of the stone at either side of the abutments to the viaduct still in place. But the timber station building here, which is part of this kit design that they can move somewhere else, that's all gone. There's a little electric substation there now. And this is the roundabout that everybody knows there. So that was the bridge which crossed over, and this is where they had to move several roads around, with the guy ended up with his back door being front and just over to the left. You can see some of the people gathered around for a photograph. At least they did stay still. Here's another example of a bridge, a much smaller one. This is under the end of the platforms at Audley Station. This is from Diglake Colliery coming through underneath the platforms, just a horse-worked line under some big girders. This is the end of the platforms here, one of the signals over there, the chimneys of the colliery behind. You can actually still see where that was. There's a depression in the embankment. This is Halmer End Station, looking south. Another one of those funny little waiting shelters. And you can see there on the left the wagon of the Midland Coal, Coke and Iron Company, which was so important in providing livelihood for people in the area. And the main station buildings were these wooden ones on the right-hand side. And then you came up, the station master's house was behind, and you came up, where there's a block of flats there now, but you came up and round this side to get to the station.
And that looking north, that?
Sorry?
From that view looking north?
I think that's, did I say south? Shall I go back? Yes, sorry, yes, you've got the station buildings on the road side, haven't you? So the signal box will be just behind you on the left. I haven't included a picture of the signal box. And the station master's house behind you on the left.
Station master's house is the other side of the wooden building, from that way. Yeah. Yeah, not by the road.
It's by
It's off the Stone Crescent.
Sorry?
It's off the Stone Crescent.
Oh, like the other end of the goods yard?
No, that's where the traffic is.
Yes. Yeah, so it's because there's two north-south houses there, isn't there, either end of the site?
Yeah, well, the station master's house is along the Golden Crescent. Off the Golden Crescent.
At the bridge?
That's
Oh,
the
right,
station
yeah.
master's
There's
house.
one there, and there's one the other end. Well, of the designs, the one the other end is earlier. I don't know which one was built as the station master's house originally. Well, that's Leasit Station, and you can't really quite see. These are some cottages further along, which were built for the players of the North Station Convoy. The station master's house would be somewhere behind there. I can't quite see whether it's there or not. This is this is looking from the level crossing at Leasit, where the roads have been rearranged and 2 lanes have been moved. And this is looking north towards the lines that staked up towards Almere. Again, very, very basic. And we should have a picture there of. That one's not coming out. Oh, we have to imagine what I'm talking about. I'm getting worried now. There's none of the others coming out. We're talking also the road was a bit nicer. It had little canopies. It was built those few years later when they knew it was going to make some money. So it looked a bit nicer. It was on a curb with 2 staggered platforms, and then the Alsager Locomotive Depot, which was the second largest on the system, was located just behind it. Right, this is completely messed up, this slide. So this is supposed to tell you about the services from Audley Station, but unfortunately the projector has turned it all into the same font size. So, I'll try and remember what it says. So, you could, the passenger station waiting rooms would be seen were located up on the embankment with the booking office at road level, and the station master's house was further along the road at the end of the goods yard that's still there today. From Audley, passengers could get to Alsager and Harecastle, but only as I say, Alsager Road, and Harecastle, which is now what we call Kidsgrove. And at Harecastle there was a separate platform on the downside of the line, so the trains crossed over and into a platform which is now filled in. You would never know it was there now. Heading south, they would then travel down through from Audley, down through the lines on through the line, the stations on the Audley line, and then get to Kiel, down through Silverdale to Newcastle, and then down to Stoke. And down at Stoke, if any of you travelled out from Stoke Station on the slow trains to Manchester from platform 3, that was the platform for the Audley line trains which terminated at Stoke. It was also the platform for the trains terminating from the Market Drayton line. It was known as the Newcastle Bay because all the trains from there served Newcastle, but then they went off in different directions after Kiel. Quite a lot of trains though, because Stoke Station had a capacity problem with only 2 through platforms, a lot of trains would continue from somewhere in the north of the system like Audley and would continue right through Stoke Station to somewhere in the south, like Cheadle or Cresswell or somewhere like that. So often people could get a direct train from Audley to somewhere in the south of Stoke. There were only 4 trains a day each day in the week. Slightly different service on Saturdays, 2 trains a day on Sundays. Not very convenient times. Unfortunately, the slides got corrupted, so I can't show you the times. But the train times were very awkward for most people. They were awkward for going to work, they were awkward for going to school, but they were designed to connect with services on the Crewe line and at Stoke. So really, you could say the passenger service was largely run for the convenience of the railway company connecting with its services, and whenever people made representations these trains are not convenient, the railway company would always say, well, if we altered one, we'd have to change every other train on the system. So most people would use the train if they found it convenient to them, but with only 4 services each way each day, it mostly wasn't. Let's see what we have next. So I'll show you a bit about what the trains actually look like, what they were like to travel in. This is not on the Audley line, but as I mentioned, the trains went further through. I think this one was at Tutbury. So this is a North Staffordshire Railway B Class 240, which was built in Stoke Locomotive Works in 1890. And it's standing on a train with very short little coaches. Nothing like what we would see today. I'll show you some more of those in a moment. But that's a very typical looking train on the Audley line. We have very, very few pictures of trains on the Audley line in North Stafford or in North Stafford days of the 1920s. Here is one. So same locomotive. What's up with that, unfortunately. But anyway, right, we'll skip over that. That is the only picture of a passenger train on the Audley line, isn't it? Right. So you can act now. Right, there we are. So these little tiny coaches, 4 compartments, or if you, for 3rd class, if you were travelling 1st class, you have the same length for 3 compartments. The North Staffordshire Railway ran loads of these little coaches. They used them for all the branch line services and services up the loop line and all over the place in the 1870s. So this is what you would have travelled on if you'd got onto a train at Audley, Hammersmith or Leaset in the 1880s. Here, this example is one that's been rescued, and it was rescued from Tutbury in 1976, so it was 100 years old then. It was built at Stoke. Does anyone know where Hyde Park Tiles is down in Stoke? You know, in Hyde Park Tiles, they're exactly where this coach was built. Okay, in that building there, that was the carriage and wagon section of the local works. And so that bit facing onto the canal there, they will bring the coaches down, put them onto a traverse and move them along. So it's a truly local piece of history. This is exactly what you would have travelled on in the Audley line. It's been knocking around at the Foxfield Railway at Blythe Bridge for many, many years, and in the trust that I'm a trustee of decided that we ought to restore it. Having knocked around for a long time. So it was sent away to a restoration company, and you've seen this already, there we are. That's what it looks like now. It's literally just been done this year. And so this will be launched for you to travel on as a passenger in August, early August. So if you want to know what it was like to travel on the Audley line in the 1880s, you can. A genuine North Staffordshire Railway 4-wheel 3rd class coach. Very, very primitive. We have another one as well called number 127. Number 127, which was in even worse condition. You can see from the top right there. And that's after we'd had it at Foxfield for 20 years. It was a chicken shed, basically. That's what it looks like now. That was finished last year, number 127. All the things that you can imagine as comfort when travelling on a train, this hasn't got. Okay? No cushions. No heating. Plenty of ventilation. If you wanted heating, you had to take a blanket or a little earthenware vessel that you put hot coals or hot water into. Lighting was provided by an oil lamp. The North Staffordshire Railway was so mean that it had pairs of compartments with one oil lamp between them and no wall between them. So you have to share an oil lamp with a whole load of people. These compartments, as the coach is 20 feet long, it's got the 3 compartments in it. So literally your knees interlock when you sit in it, with the people sitting opposite you. And we have stories, if you read Arnold Bennett and so on, you will know that people travelled with chickens, dogs, all kinds of things, crammed into these little carriages. So please, if you want to know what it was like to travel on the Audley line in the 1880s, come to Boxfield and we can show you. Okay. And I've got, if anyone would like to, contribute to the restoration of our next coach to go with them, we've just acquired a first-class one, and we want to build a disabled carriage to go with them in exactly the same style, using some other bits that we've got. So we'll have a 4-coach train to show what Victorian rail travel was really like, not fancy things like the Victoria Road. Got some things with the back. Now this one's not worked, so that's a shame. The North Staffordshire Railway introduced a different service on the line with some contraptions called rail motors to try to overcome the problem of the competition by trams and motor buses, later motor buses, in particular after the First World War. And we can't get this to work. None of these are coming out, unfortunately. Sorry about that. So, they invested in some new rolling stock when the railways were grouped after the First World War. So some of those old coaches that I've just shown you were still running in 1923 on trains for miners. So the technology hadn't moved on that much. But when the North Staffordshire Railway was taken over by the London, Midland and Scottish Railways, part of a government grouping of railways into 4 large companies, they did invest in the Audley line in a few different ways. LMS locomotives started to be used instead of some of the old North Stafford ones, particularly on the north end of the line. The carriages were replaced by some slightly more modern ones, only cascaded from services elsewhere. And the big iron viaduct at Bignell End by the plough there was replaced by a new steel bridge in 1925, which enabled heavier trains to be run on the line. But after that, the story is entirely one of decline, because the key thing that happened was the bankruptcy of the Midland Coal, Coke and Iron Company as one of the first casualties of the Depression. 3,000 men locally lost their jobs. Many of you will know a lot more about that than I do. But many people thought that the Coal, Coke and Iron Company would be taken over and everything would be well, that Akedale would continue to flourish, people would still have jobs, but they didn't. It was sold off for scrap, and so many people left the area. Also, bus and tram competition saw that the Audley line had many fewer people travelling on it. Despite the introduction of these rail motors, which were much faster and had more stopping places, they couldn't compete with the trams and the motor buses. And so the LMS decided to close the line to passengers on the 27th of April 1931. It was one of the first lines in this area to be closed to passengers. As a further cost-cutting measure, all the Audley and the Market Drayton lines were reduced to single track. So I showed you it was double track. They took one track up. It meant that they had to provide different sorts of junctions and more signal boxes so that trains could be passed down the signal line safely. So they constructed some new signal boxes. Show you one of those. No, down, out. No, there's that. So I can show you some pictures along the line. And none of them have come out. So, last activity was for the open cast coal at Bignell Hill in 1954 to 1957. And when that finished, that was the end of railway number 3, that short bit of line from Bignell Junction. Madeley Colliery closed in 1957. The last materials left in 1959, so there was no traffic on the southern end of the line by then. There are photographs though. We do know that it was still used as a diversionary route. It was kept maintained and kept open in the very early 1960s. But the decision was taken to close it in 1962, and it was lifted quite quickly in 1963, 1964. It was one of the first lines in the North Staffordshire area to close completely. If anyone tells you it closed as a result of the beaching report, they're wrong, because it closed before the report even came out. Interesting, the Market Drayton line, built as part of that 1864 Act, continued to be used with passengers right up to 1957. It was even considered as being a major freight through route at one time in the 1960s. And some of that line still exists today, although it's mothballed. So the fortunes of the lines that were built as a result of the 1864 Act are quite varied. Now, I bet a lot of these haven't come out then. There was other pictures, a few will have done. So a few pictures of the railway in its final days. That's the closed station at Leaset in the snow. I would think that's probably about 1961 sort of time, before some of the track was taken out. This one hasn't come out, I noticed. Unfortunately. Over that. And now it's over that. So sorry about that, but I'm not sure why. I think the one project is not right. Okay. And so Audley waited 60 years for its railway. He enjoyed it for a few years. It's been 50 years since it died. Please go and have a look at some of the remains and remember the people who built it and the vision that they had.
I'll take the screen down. If anybody's got any questions for Mark, please fire them up. And I'd like to thank you for persevering with the projectors. Unfortunately, we didn't have much time to learn how to use it ourselves. Thank you for that. I have a question actually. You know the event at Foxfield in August?
Yes.
What date do you know?
I think it's 6th to the 8th. I meant to put it on the screen, but yeah, we've got we're having a launch for the people who contributed to the restoration, and then a public day with some visiting dignitaries and so on. To
celebrate the result.
A celebratory lunch. People who really did the work.
Will the
Sorry.
will the coaches be running on Wednesdays and Sundays as they do at London?
Those coaches will only be used 2 or 3 times a year at Foxfield. They'll also go on visiting the Churnick Valley Railway. One is going later this month. Number 61 is going later this month to go and stand next to their understory one to help raise money to restore that.
21st and 22nd, I think it is. It's that weekend.
So that will prove a good contrast. Go and see it. But it won't be running for people to ride in it. That will be at the launch in August.
So how many of those coaches are there in existence?
There are 4, 5 that we know of. There will be 4. There are 2 I've shown you, which are 3rd class. They're 2 slightly different ones. The second one I showed you is slightly older, probably built in Birmingham, wasn't built in stone, slightly nicer. There's a first class one at Cheddington, which they've had for years, which used to be somebody's summer house years ago, and they've been wanting to restore it for many years. So we'd like to get that with some funding to be added to the set. Then we want to build a brake coach, a brake third, have 2 third class compartments, just like the 61, and a brake compartment which will take wheelchairs. We've been offered the remains of 2 other coaches which exactly match, which will be able to use the parts from those. They're really bad condition, much worse than anything I've shown you. Use those to make an authentic looking brake coach for disabled people. So that's what we're raising funds for at the moment.
Did the original stock have brakes on the actual coaches? I know a lot of them did.
Yeah, I said about stopping trains, didn't I? We take it for granted that a train's going to stop if you pull a thing called a communication cord, but that didn't come in until the 1880s at the earliest, and many coaches never got fitted with it. What used to happen, and even then when they had that, it wasn't originally fitted what they called the automatic vacuum brake, which stopped the train. It just alerted the driver that something was wrong. So the automatic vacuum brake, where you pull in the cord or the driver opening the valve or the guard opening the valve, which put all the brakes on all the wheels on the whole train, didn't come in until the 1890s. What those coaches had when they were built was an outside chain running in rings that ran along the eaves just above the windows and doors. If you wanted to stop the train, you had to open the window, reach up, pull the chain down as hard as you could, and it rang a bell on the engine. So, health and safety's come a long way.
Passengers start to use the railway because you did mention industry first, didn't you?
Yes.
So when did the passengers start to use
In
it?
1880, when they opened those first stations, so people had lobbied for this from 1876 to be able to use it for passenger trains. But it took until 1880 to actually open the stations, and traffic was not terribly good, so they closed in 1931. So Audley had a passenger railway for only those 51 years. That's long enough. That's quite, that's time for a lot longer. I talked to one or two people who rode on it and who preferred it to the buses. So. Has anyone walked the line and gone and had a look at some of the surviving architecture? It's quite a lot to see, especially if you go in the winter. So. Yes, I did a walk earlier this year. I've not done one for about 5 years, so yeah. Only about a dozen, so there's room for plenty more. I can take about 20 or 30 people in one go.
Have you done any more planned?
Sorry?
Have you got any more planned dates for future walks?
No, I could do another one next year. It's no point in going in the summer, even though you get nicer weather, because the undergrowth you won't see anything.
Yeah.
Especially if you go to Jamage Junction, it's a jungle. If you go in February or March, you can see everything. So all the lovely little every coach has it.
I noticed that you found that coach in Manifold.
Yes.
Well, that's the railway I particularly like, the Manifold Railway. But their coaches were more elaborate, those are verandas. Well,
How did it end up there? You're wondering how it ended up there?
yeah, because they did say one or two of the manifolds were like Swiss, or
Yes. Or Indian.
verandas on them,
Yes.
front and back, like Rajpool.
The Manifold Valley Railway was a narrow gauge railway, 2'6" gauge, rather than the 4'8.5" of the Overground. None of the rolling stock from that survives, although you can see similar things still in India. The North Staffordshire Railway, to save money, wanted to put some waiting shelters, bicycle stores and general storerooms along the Manifold Valley Railway. So what did they use? Old coach bodies. You didn't have porter cabins then, you had old coach and van bodies. They were everywhere. You still see them around the countryside today. So from the store at just north of Stoke, just down by Newcastle Junction, there were loads of old coaches there. And in 1905, 1906, the board made a decision that they were going to send those coaches up to Waterhouses, take the bodies off, ship them up the valley, and dump them at the stations to use as waiting rooms. We're not sure which station that one was at, but that's how it came to be there. It ended up then at a farm, and in fact, one of the people who's coming as a guest of honour to the launch in August is one of the ladies who owned the farm and knew the coach there when it was there. So she's going to come and have a ride in it. She already knew it was a chicken shed. She's going to come and have a ride in it in August. She's about 97.
So was that coach then be for the Manifold Valley Narrowgauge Railway?
No, it was a standard gauge coach for lines like the Audley line. It was only taken to the Manifold Valley as a stall. Never ran on the railway there. Too big.
Because there is one or two, if you look at some of the old photographs, they used the coaches on the Narrowgauge Railway as like platform stations.
That's right.
So there's one or two that have been moved that I walk on there, and the council showed us one or two that have been taken off the line and they're actually farther into the field.
Yes, there was a few that had been moved from there because there were lots of them. They took loads.
My aunt was about of course she's quite old. But she remembers quite a few, she worked at Rugby.
Yes.
And she used to serve teas at the houses by the lake until the weekend. And she said at Rugby they got quite a few villages around the lake.
Yes, the North Staffordshire Railway owned Rudyard Lake, and they promoted it as a place to go as a tourist attraction for day trips, and people used use these old coach bodies as little chalets along the edge of the
Yeah,
lake.
she said that's what we need. But some people, at the bottom of the lake, there's still 2 houses, but they made of bricks. But she said the people lived in it all year round. It was like a weekend thing.
Yeah, there were some that were, there was one that was rescued from over in Shrewsbury, which had been lived in, an old Staffordshire coach. And yeah, the people who lived in that, I mean, it's very, very tiny. It makes a studio flat look big. But unfortunately that one got burned years ago. But yeah, I mean, people used to live in these coaches in Scotland. I've been up to North East Scotland, which is where 15 of the North Staffordshire bigger coaches ended up. I've not found one yet, but I know that people lived in them up there.
There was a couple that I remember stopping in Wales, with Wales, and in the garden they got a full-size coach. They actually lived in that, and they rented out the house. For weekends. So they lived in it. But actually, you say it's small. I was surprised how much room there is in the carriage. This is the full length.
Yeah, full length baby coach.
I was surprised.
One of these little tiny
You've still got the Pullman Steak Bar up at Hildeston,
Yes.
at Spotgate,
Yes.
and that is still used as a restaurant.
Yes.
So,
Not local coaches though, unfortunately.
No.
Yeah, very nice.
but it's now used as a restaurant. It was a luxury one.
Pullman cars those are. Yeah. There was an accident in 1921. At the time I didn't show anything about it, but when I do the walk, I take people to exactly where the accident happened and explain why it happened. The line was in a bad state after the First World War. There weren't enough men to maintain the line, and the North Staffordshire Railway was cutting corners every way it could. It introduced some very large locomotives with 10 wheels, much heavier than anything that had been before. And on that very nasty reverse curve with a steep gradient just north of Leaset, one very hot day in midsummer 1921, one of these large engines and a train of 5 or 6 coaches was bowling down there. The driver, a guy called Twig, opened it up and thrashed it up the hill to Leaset, and the whole lot came off the track. And what had happened, although the North Staffordshire Railway tried to claim this was an act of God, was the heat of the summer's day had expanded the rails and pushed one of the rails over. It wouldn't have done that if the track had been maintained properly. You could look at the accident report and draw your own conclusions, but the fact that they were hastily trying to make everything good at the time the inspector arrived suggests that they knew they'd done something wrong. So, yeah, nobody was hurt. If the train hadn't been on the in the cutting, if it had been on the embankment just 100 yards further back, then quite a lot of people would have been seriously injured or killed. Every line had accidents.
The knotty that went around the Stoke-on-Trent area,
Yes.
did you know that there's just only one piece of the knotty still in existence? And that's on the parapet of the bridge parapet in Bath Road, Longton, and the actual motif and everything is still there.
Oh yes, yes.
And that's the only one, that's the only bit of thing that's left of the knotty.
Yes, I've got a drawing of that at home. I bought it on eBay.
Yeah, it's still there, it's still there.
A beautiful old wooden drawing. I don't think the person selling it knew what it was, but it's got that crest on it. Yeah.
Do you have any idea how many staff actually worked at the station, say at Audley and Halmer End?
I don't. It's not an area I've looked into very much. I do remember reading that the station master at Halmer End was very well paid, because the station masters were in different tiers, and if you wanted a promotion, you would go for a station that had more traffic. And Halmer End station was, I think, only 2 tiers below Stoke, so it was considered a station with a large amount of traffic because of the nearby collieries. Which seems a little bit strange. It had its goods yard and so on, it was serving quite a large area. It seems a bit strange because the Midland Coal, Coke and Iron Company, operating the line up Aikdale to Podmore Hall and Mini Pit and so on, was always falling out with the North Staffordshire, and it would send its coal out any other way it possibly could. It even, at one point in the mid-1870s, told the North Staffordshire it was going to build its own line north west to the London North Western south of Crewe to avoid sending another bit of coal over the North Stamford if it possible. So why Halmer End was so high prestige, I don't really know. It seems a bit strange. In terms of how many people worked there, I mean, all these stations had staff for both the goods and the passenger side. So you didn't walk to an unstaffed halt.
It's probably quite a lot of people, I would imagine, because a lot of the stations were well populated with staff compared with what we have nowadays.
There are some people in the North Staffordshire Railway Study Group who look particularly at the staff records. So if any of you have an interest in any of your family history researches and you want to know about connections with the North Staffordshire Railway, or you've come across a railway term for an employment and you don't know what it means, get in touch with us. We're always happy to help.
One possible reason for Halmer End being a major junction or major traffic, I know John Riley used to take a lot of explosives along those in there.
Right, that may be. Yes. They had special patents for those. Very, very careful regulation to that. We haven't really talked about it.
So,
yes, I've got a few things on the table at the back there. So I've got a few things there about the coaches that we're being restoring at Foxwood and some leaflets about the North Staffordshire Railway Study Group. So if anyone's interested in those, please pick them up. I've got some of our previous newsletters. If you just drop a donation of £1 for those, that would be great. And I've got 1 or 2 local railway history books there as well. Now, you're really going to lynch me for this. I have brought some packs of Christmas cards that are showing you what's coming for the coaches. Now is the time to buy while stock starts, because I predict by November we will have sold out. So they're £5 a pack. All the proceeds, the printing of them being donated to the trust, so all the proceeds go towards our great coach for the disabled.
can we have another round of applause?